It sits on millions of hands. A clear, hard stone set in metal, presented as proof of forever. Couples pose with it. Families photograph it. Entire industries exist to grade it, cut it, insure it, and sell the story that surrounds it. Jewelers speak of the 4 C's. Advertisements speak of eternity. The moment a ring is slipped onto a finger is treated as one of life's most meaningful transactions. Yet the near-universal expectation that an engagement ring must include a diamond is not ancient tradition. It is the product of calculated scarcity, imperial consolidation in southern Africa, and one of the most effective advertising campaigns ever conceived. The stone itself is not especially rare. The meaning attached to it was deliberately manufactured, refined, and protected for more than a century. In the dry interior of what is now South Africa, in the late 1860s, diamonds began turning up on a farm owned by 2 brothers named De Beer. Prospectors flooded the region. Claims were staked, fought over, abandoned, and consolidated. An ambitious young Englishman named Cecil Rhodes arrived in the area, first renting steam-powered pumps to miners whose claims were flooding, then buying claims of his own, then buying companies. By 1888, he had formed De Beers Consolidated Mines. Within a short span, the company controlled the overwhelming majority of the world's diamond production. Rhodes understood a simple commercial truth. If supply could be tightly managed, prices could be protected. Excess stones were held back from the market. Distribution was funneled through a single channel, the Diamond Syndicate, later refined into the Central Selling Organization and eventually the Diamond Trading Company. Independent producers were brought into the system through contracts or outcompeted. For decades, the arrangement worked with remarkable efficiency. De Beers did not merely mine diamonds, it decided how many the world would see and at what price they would move. Then came the 1930s. The Great Depression crushed demand for luxury goods across the industrialized world. Mines closed, stockpiles grew larger. The company faced a problem that pure control of supply could not solve on its own. People simply were not buying enough diamonds. In 1938, De Beers turned to the Philadelphia advertising agency N.W. Ayer & Son with a brief that went far beyond ordinary product promotion. The goal was to change what Americans believed a diamond meant and to make the diamond engagement ring feel socially necessary rather than optional. The agency conducted research into public attitudes and found that diamonds were associated with wealth and status, but not yet with romantic necessity for the broad middle class. Engagement rings had existed for centuries. Aristocrats had exchanged diamond rings as early as the 15th century. One of the earliest well-documented examples is the 1477 betrothal gift from Archduke Maximilian to Mary of Burgundy. But for most ordinary people, other stones or no stone at all remained common. The campaign set out to alter that reality through sustained cultural pressure rather than simple product claims. Advertisements appeared in major magazines. Hollywood stars were discreetly lent diamonds for public appearances. Lecturers known as diamond experts visited women's clubs, social groups, and even high schools. Stories were carefully placed in newspapers and society columns linking the stones to romance, permanence, and social aspiration. The strategy was patient, multi-layered, and thorough. It treated the diamond not merely as a commodity, but as a psychological necessity whose absence would leave a marriage incomplete. In 1947, a copywriter named Frances Gerety, who had been handling the De Beers account since the early 1940s, was asked for a signature line that could anchor the entire effort. Late one night, exhausted after finishing a batch of copy, she realized she had forgotten the slogan. She later recalled asking almost in prayer for a line. She scribbled 4 words, "A diamond is forever." When she presented it the next morning, colleagues were not immediately impressed. The grammar felt slightly odd. The line stayed anyway. It appeared in every major De Beers advertisement thereafter and was later judged by Advertising Age the most successful slogan of the 20th century. Gerety herself never married. She lived quietly, worked the account for roughly a quarter of a century, and watched the phrase she wrote reshape an entire ritual of modern life. The results were measurable and dramatic. Before the Second World War, only a small percentage of American engagement rings contained diamonds. Estimates place the figure near 10%. Within a few decades, the number approached 80%. Wholesale diamond sales in the United States rose from roughly $23 million in 1939 to more than $2 billion by 1979. The campaign later introduced the idea that a man should spend 1 month's salary on the ring, then revised the suggestion upward to 2 months. The notion of a fixed financial measure of love entered popular culture and proved remarkably durable. And if you think the story ends with clever advertising and rising sales figures, stay with me, because the system that made the slogan possible rested on far more than persuasive images and carefully placed product placement. In the early Kimberley fields, the labor force was largely black African men recruited from rural areas on temporary contracts. As the mines deepened and the value of the stones became clearer, the major companies introduced closed compounds. High corrugated walls, guarded gates, covered walkways leading directly to the shafts, and routine body searches became standard. Workers lived inside the compounds for the length of their contracts, separated from the wider town and from their families. The publicly stated purpose was to prevent diamond theft by controlling every movement of the workforce. The practical effect was tight managerial control over a large, relatively low-paid labor pool. By the late 1880s, after De Beers consolidated the major mines under single ownership, the closed compound system became compulsory for the black labor force at Kimberley. Conditions varied across compounds, but overcrowding, inadequate sanitation, temperature extremes between day and night, respiratory disease, and high accident rates were repeatedly documented in the historical record. Workers were searched thoroughly at the end of contracts. In some accounts, the final days included isolation intended to ensure any swallowed stones would be recovered. The system later influenced labor practices on the gold mines further north and formed part of the broader architecture of racial control that characterized the region for generations. Control of the rough diamond market itself endured for most of the 20th century under the successive leadership of Rhodes and then Ernest Oppenheimer and his family. New sources of diamonds, first in Southwest Africa, later in Russia, Australia, and Canada, gradually eroded the company's ability to act as the sole gatekeeper. By the 1980s and 1990s, De Beers' share of global rough sales, once near 90%, began a long decline. Conflict diamonds, stones mined in war zones and sold to fund armed groups in parts of Africa during the 1990s, brought intense public and regulatory scrutiny to the entire industry. The Kimberley Process Certification Scheme, launched in the early 2000s, attempted to create a chain of custody system for rough diamonds, though its effectiveness has been debated ever since. De Beers itself shifted strategy, moving away from the old role of stockpiler of last resort and focusing more on branded retail and selective distribution. In recent years, laboratory-grown diamonds have added further commercial pressure by offering chemically identical stones at lower prices and with fewer ethical questions attached to their origin. None of this erases the earlier achievement. A commodity whose price was protected for decades by artificial scarcity was successfully reframed as the indispensable symbol of lifelong commitment. The ring that appears in proposals, wedding photographs, and family heirlooms carries that layered history whether the wearer knows it or not. The brilliance of the stone is real. The hardness is real. The refractive qualities that make it catch light are real. What was engineered was the cultural conviction that no other token could properly mark the beginning of a marriage, and that the financial sacrifice required to obtain one was itself proof of seriousness. The next time you see a diamond engagement ring, the object itself has not changed. It is still a carefully cut piece of crystallized carbon, durable enough to last far longer than any human relationship. The meaning, however, was built layer by layer. First through the consolidation of African mines, then through the disciplined control of global supply, then through a sustained campaign of images, stories, and slogans that taught generations what forever was supposed to look like. The stone remains a stone. Everything else was carefully attached. If this changed how you look at a diamond ring, consider subscribing for more hidden histories behind the familiar things we take for granted. Like the video if you found the investigation worth your time, and tell me in the comments, Knowing the monopoly, the marketing, and the labor systems that shaped it, would you still choose a natural diamond for an engagement? Or does the full story make you think differently about what the stone is supposed to represent?